BBC Radio Berkshire.
Berkshire News and Berkshire Stories with Phil Kennedy.
Be part of it.
5:21 right now, BBC Radio Berkshire on this Wednesday evening. Dave Bartram, the front man of Shawaddy Waddy, is on the way, and we've got Caroline Lucas of the Green Party, who's been in Reading today.
BBC Radio Berkshire.
Berkshire News and Berkshire Stories with Phil Kennedy.
Green Party leader Caroline Lucas has been visiting Reading today. She's been meeting mums in the town to find out how the government cuts are affecting them. I spoke to her earlier and asked her what she's been talking about.
Yes, I've been meeting with a number of people in Reading this afternoon, and the message is very clearly coming over that they are deeply worried about this government's cuts. They're worried about their impact in terms of their own standard of living around, the schools and hospitals, the NHS bill. So we've been having a really good discussion about some of the key national issues that affect people in Reading, as well as some of their key hopes around the local elections and the local council as well.
Yes, Reading has some Green Party councillors. In fact, you're the first Green MP. Do you think people are beginning to get that message, the Green message, or do you think it's still one of those sort of, I don't want to vote for any of them, I'm left with a Green, I'll vote for Green?
No, I think more and more people are voting Green in a very deliberate way. I mean, obviously, our voting system doesn't help, unfortunately, for smaller parties. But I think what we're seeing in Reading, as we've seen in other places around the country, is that once you get that first foot in the door, when Rob White was first elected here in Reading a couple of years ago, people saw then that Green policies are very practical, that he was able to achieve concrete things in the council, whether that was to do with introducing a living wage policy in order to make sure that people were better off when they're on lower incomes, or whether it was to do with the environment, renewable energy. You know, Greens do what they say, and once you get the foot in the door and get through that credibility barrier, more Greens follow.
Looking at your policies, is there, even in these straitened times, that sense of, well, you know, we'd like to do something for the environment, but isn't any sort of green issue rather expensive? Well,
I would say the opposite, that it's exactly at a time of economic difficulty that we need to be investing in green policies, whether that's to do with, for example, renewable energies. Actually, that can end up saving people money. It also creates a lot of jobs. The government's feed-in tariff system for solar power was potentially a good system. Unfortunately, they've just changed it and made it much more difficult. But essentially, those kinds of policies, when they're done properly, as they would be with the Greens, are good for the environment, they're good for jobs, and they're good for people's pockets too, because they save them money.
Yes, I mean, it was interesting, you know, it's only 24 hours since we had the sort of reveal of the government's planning policies. What did you make of that?
Well, I think it's good that the government appears to have grudgingly listened to the amount of criticism that their original draft proposals attracted. And so they have now, for example, got a better definition of what they mean by sustainable development. And that general presumption in favour of development always going ahead has thankfully gone. What I worry about, though, is what it will actually mean in reality, because we know that what's driving this change in the planning policy is still the fact that the government believes that we need to make it much, much easier to build. Now, I think we certainly need some building. We need a lot more affordable housing, for example. But I don't think it's right to say that the biggest block to that happening is the lack of speedy planning. That was to do with the economic situation, not the fact that we need to be using every last bit of green space to build on.
What do you make of the latest situation, the fuel tankers' potential strike at the moment? They haven't given us any more details on this, but as it stands, I mean, the government seem to sort of mildly be putting their foot in it and upping the ante. Or do you think it is actually a bit more political than at first thought?
I mean, I hope very much that a strike can be avoided, of course, because strikes should only go ahead if they really are a measure of last resort. And so I hope that the government will use its negotiating powers to try to ensure that absolutely everything is done to mean that people's lives aren't disrupted over the coming weeks with a fuel strike.
And just finally, you know, you personally, there you are, you're the Green Party leader, you are an MP, the only Green MP in Parliament. Do you feel outnumbered, or do you feel you are getting your voice heard?
No, I do think that it is possible to get the Green voice heard, and I think that's because on a whole range of issues we're saying something different. You know, whether or not that's to do with, you know, having a principled opposition to the privatisation of public services, for example, because although Labour has opposed the health and social care bill, the truth is that it was under a Labour government that the commercialisation of the NHS was really accelerated. Labour's opposed tuition fees, but again, it was under Labour that tuition fees were introduced. So Labour, in a sense, is already contaminated by its past history. I think what the Greens can do is bring a new approach to social issues, as well as making sure that the environment is properly high on the agenda, so that other parties have to take notice of that and have to put those green policies into practice.
Caroline, good to speak to you, and glad you enjoyed the sunshine in Reading today.
Thanks so much.
BBC Radio Berkshire.
Travel you trust.
Every 15 minutes.
And as it happens.
Green Party leader Caroline Lucas MP. It's 5:30. So, Dave, the frontman of Shuadi Wadi on the way. Let's get the latest on the roads. And we'll start out on the M4. Slow traffic westbound on the M4. Earlier...